I wasn't supposed to be there that day. That's TBH, the thing I keep coming back to, honestly. I'd rescheduled my London trip twice, once because of a work deadline, once because my sister talked me out of flying in November. Too gray, she said. Too cold. You'll just stand, in the rain and feel sad. But I came anyway. Third week of November, a Tuesday, and the sky over Westminster was doing that particular thing it does in autumn where it can't decide between silver and white. Not quite overcast, not quite bright, just suspended. Like the whole city was holding its breath. I'd been walking since 7 in the morning, proper tourist mode, camera around my neck, coffee going cold in my hand, map app open even though I kept ignoring it. I'd done the Abbey the day before, Parliament that morning, and by 10:30 I was drifting toward the Mall. No real plan except to end up near Buckingham Palace before the light shifted. There were maybe 40, 50 people gathered along the railing by the time I arrived. Not a huge crowd, which midweek, off-season, so it had that particular quiet to it. The kind of tourist gathering where everyone is a little reverent without quite knowing why. I think a few school groups. Some Japanese visitors with serious camera equipment. A couple near me speaking what sounded like Portuguese, the woman pointing things out to her partner with genuine excitement. The guards were at their posts. I, for what it's worth, don't know how many times I'd seen photographs of them. The ones in the tall black bearskins, scarlet tunics, the whole image you grow up seeing on biscuit tins and tea towels. But standing actually 20 feet away from one in real life is different. There's a stillness to them that photographs don't quite capture. Not just the not moving, it's the quality of the not moving. Like they've excised something from themselves. Like they're made of different material than the rest of us. In my opinion, one I was watching, I'll call him the East Guard, just because of where he was positioned, was young. Early 20s, maybe. I could tell from the set of his jaw, the slight smoothness of his face beneath the chin strap. Tall, very straight, which his eyes were fixed at some middle distance that didn't include any of us. I took, in my opinion, a few photos, plus felt a bit embarrassed about it the way you always do when you're photographing a human being who's deliberately pretending to be a statue. I moved along the railing a bit, drank my cold coffee, and that's when the first car arrived. It came from the side entrance rather than the main gate. A long black vehicle, not a Range Rover. More of a formal saloon I didn't recognize the make of. The kind of car that announces importance without shouting about it. The windows were tinted the absolute legal maximum. 2 motorcycle escorts ahead of it. A follow car behind. For what it's worth, the crowd stirred. That collective shift when people sense something official is happening. Someone near me said quietly, "Is that?" and didn't finish the sentence. The car slowed near the side entrance, which a protection officer stepped out first. Earpiece, dark suit, the practiced visual sweep that these men do where it looks casual but absolutely isn't. He opened the rear door. Plus, and I wasn't close enough to see clearly, I want to be straight about that. I was probably 30, 35 feet away, on the wrong side of the railing, partially behind a family with a pushchair. What I saw through gaps, through phone screens that other people were already raising. What I saw first was a coat and deep burgundy, very fine fabric, and then a woman stepping out with the careful, practiced movement of someone who has exited cars in public for decades. Queen Camilla, I recognized her the way you recognize someone famous in real life. That half-second delay where your brain says, "I know that face," before it supplies the name. Lighter in person than on television. TBH, smaller than I expected. But there was something about the composure she carried that made her seem substantial regardless of physical size. But she paused just outside the car, said something to the protection officer. He nodded. Another for what it's worth. Figure was climbing out behind her. An aide, I think. A younger woman with a tablet and that particular energy of someone who's perpetually managing 17 things. The small group began moving toward the entrance. And that's when I noticed the East Guard shift. It was subtle, not a full movement. More like a micro-adjustment, a weight transfer that his training probably would have described as a breach of protocol. His eyes moved, and just slightly, not at the crowd, toward the approaching party. I didn't think much of it in the moment. I thought maybe it was just the natural difficulty of maintaining perfect stillness when a member of the royal family is walking 12 feet in front of you. I thought, if anything, that it was humanizing. A flicker of real life through the performance of formality. I was wrong about what it meant. What for what it's worth happened next took maybe 4 seconds in real time. But the way these things work, when you replay them later, when you've described them to your sister on the phone, when you've lain awake at 2 in the morning reconstructing the sequence, 4 seconds can expand into something you can walk around inside. Camilla had reached a point roughly level with the guard's post. Her aide was slightly behind her, head down, reading something on the tablet. The protection officer was to her, left, a half step ahead. There was a sound, not loud, not dramatic. I mean just a sound. A sharp, flat report, like a hardback book dropped on a tile floor, or a ruler slapped against a desk. Crisp, and which instantaneous. I turned my head toward it before I consciously understood what I was hearing. The East Guard's head had moved, his chin strap had shifted, his expression, and this is the part that stays with me, his expression hadn't changed. At all. Plus, he was still looking at that middle distance. Still absolutely composed, but his head had moved in the way that heads move when something makes contact with them. There was a murmur through the crowd. Plus, not loud. Confused. The kind of sound people make when they've registered that something happened but haven't yet processed what. Camilla had stopped walking. She was facing the guard. Her right arm was... I struggled to describe this precisely, because what I saw didn't fully make sense to me in the moment. Her arm was returning to her side. From a position that had been raised, and the aide had looked up from her tablet. The protection officer had turned. Very fast, which nobody moved for a moment. I remember thinking, standing there with my cold coffee and my camera and my complete inability to process what I thought I might have just witnessed. That didn't happen. Not as a denial. Plus, more as a genuine question my brain was putting to itself. Did that just happen? The crowd around me was doing the same calculation. I could feel it. That collective pause of 40 people simultaneously wondering if they'd seen what they thought they saw. The East Guard hadn't moved and had not reacted, had not spoken. He was still pretty much looking at that middle distance. Still absolutely still. Still made of different material than the rest of us. But something had happened. And then something had happened in the space between the Queen of England and a 20-something soldier who had signed on to stand immobile in front of a palace for the symbolic continuity of an institution he believed in enough to dedicate hours of his life to. And somewhere across the courtyard, through the entrance and the corridors and the protocol and the distance, a king was being told something. Let me tell you something about those guards before I go on. Because I think most people, and I include myself in this before that Tuesday, carry a sort of comfortable fiction about them. That they're essentially decorative, living props. That the bare skin and the tunic and the polished boots are a kind of theater, a performance of Britishness for tourists. But then that the men and women inside those uniforms are going along with it because it's a job, and the job comes with a particular costume. That's not quite right. Or rather, it's not the whole of it. I found this out afterward, in the days I spent sort of obsessively looking into what I'd witnessed. Reading, asking questions, talking to a retired Army corporal I met at a pub near Waterloo who had done ceremonial duty in his 20s and had a lot to say about it. What the public doesn't fully grasp is the training that precedes those posts. These aren't actors hired to stand still. They're soldiers. I mean, real ones, trained ones, with deployments and fitness standards and a command structure that's utterly serious about what the uniform represents. The ceremonial posting is an honor, and it is also a discipline test unlike almost anything else in professional military life because the discipline required is internal. You cannot be angry. You cannot be startled. You cannot, above all, react. It's not physical strength that the role demands, though that's part of it. It's a kind of psychological architecture. You have to build a room inside yourself that nothing from the outside world can enter without your permission, and then you've to stand in that room for hours. The retired corporal I spoke to, his name was Gary, mid-50s, had one of those permanently outdoors complexions, said something that I wrote down that evening and have read several times since. He said, "The hardest thing isn't standing still. Plenty of people can stand still. The hardest thing isn't letting them see. They got to you. Because some of them really try, which and you've to let them try and not give them anything. Not a blink, which not a twitch. Nothing. Because the day you give them something is the day every tourist in. That courtyard thinks the uniform is a toy." He wasn't talking about Camilla when he said that. He was talking in general, about the drunk tourists, the people who think it's funny to shout in their ears, the ones who try to make. Them actually laugh, the ones who step over the rope and into the guard's personal space just to film their own transgression. But when I described what I'd seen, or thought I'd seen, he went very quiet. He said, "That's different." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Because there's nothing in the training that covers that. Not officially. Not specifically, which there's general guidance about maintaining composure regardless of external stimulus. But that presupposes the stimulus comes from civilians, from outside the institution." He paused, turned his pint glass a quarter turn on the bar mat. "That lad standing there was protecting her? I mean, that's the job. And if the job..." He stopped, started again. "That's a different kind of hard." I thought about the East Guard's face a lot after that conversation. Back in the moment, on that Tuesday, the few seconds after the sound, after Camilla's arm returned to her side, after the crowd's confused murmur, there was a kind of suspended animation. Nobody seemed to know what the protocol was for what had possibly just happened. Camilla herself looked. And I'm going to be very careful here because I was 30 feet away and I'm an ordinary person, not a lip reader, not a body language expert, not anyone with special insight into the inner life of royalty. She looked irritated. That's the only word I've for it. Plus, not embarrassed, not alarmed, irritated, in the way someone looks when a minor thing has not gone to their preference. She said something to the aide. The aide, the young woman with the tablet, looked for one visible second like she didn't know what to do with her face. Then she smoothed it out and nodded, made a note or pretended to make a note. The protection honestly officer had moved between Camilla and the guard, not dramatically, just reoriented himself. The way, in my opinion, you'd slide a piece on a chessboard. Oh, and then Camilla walked inside, plus, just like that. The entrance doors closed behind her. The aide followed. Plus, the protection officer took up a new position. The, motorcycles that had come with the car were already pulling away. The whole official apparatus of the moment simply continued, in my opinion, moved on. Self-healed the way an institution with centuries of practice at self-healing does. What was left was the crowd and the guard. The crowd was doing what crowds do after confusing events, which is turn to each other and murmur and try to establish a shared account of what had happened. I guess I heard fragments. "Did she?" And like, "I think that was..." And "No, that can't be right." And the slightly hysterical note of someone saying to their friend, "I've it on video. Look." I look at the video. The East Guard hadn't moved. I stood there and watched him for probably 3 full minutes after Camilla went inside. Long enough that the crowd thinned a little, that a few people gave up trying to process the event and drifted away. Long enough that the light shifted slightly and my coffee went from cold to truly undrinkable. He stood there. To be fair, that same middle distance, that same composure. Plus, not performing composure. That's the thing I keep trying to explain when I describe this, and I'm not sure I ever quite manage it. There's a difference between someone acting calm and someone actually inhabiting a kind of stillness that goes all the way down. The second one is rarer than people think. I've seen it in a few places, in very experienced surgeons, in people who've lived through serious things, and in occasionally the very old. I mean, he had it. He was 20-something and he had it, and I don't know what that costs. There was a man near me, British, I think, older, the sort of man who wears a wax jacket even in a city, who had also been watching. He said, not to me specifically, but to the air in front of him. They don't train for that, you know. Nobody responded, but everyone within earshot had heard. It was about 25 minutes later that the second car arrived. Different configuration this time, which less formal in a way. 1 chase vehicle instead of 2, no motorcycle escort. A Range Rover, actually, dark green. It came to the side entrance with less ceremony than the first vehicle, but somehow with more gravity. The way urgent things sometimes have less pageantry than expected. There was no build-up, no warning, at which just the car, and then the door, and then, I'd moved by now, worked my way to a slightly better position along the railing. I'm not entirely sure why. Some instinct that the story wasn't finished. I could see more clearly this time. Kind of. A man stepped out. He wasn't young. He moved with care, the particular care of someone who pays daily attention to how their body is doing and has learned to work with it rather than against it. He was sort of wearing a dark suit, no tie, which seemed in itself like a statement of informality, a departure from the usual. I recognized him immediately. To be fair, King Charles. He didn't look at the crowd, not dismissively. More like the crowd simply wasn't the thing his attention was oriented toward at that moment. He was looking at the entrance. And he said something to the protection officer who had come with him. Brief, directive. And then he looked at the guard. Not a glance. Not the cursory acknowledgement that dignitaries sometimes offer to ceremonial staff. The brief nod that says, I see you're here and I'm grateful, but we won't be making anything of it. He looked at the guard the way someone looks when they're actually seeing another person. He walked toward him. This caused a new stir in the crowd. A ripple of confusion, of phones being raised again, of people nudging each other. Because in my opinion, this isn't part of any protocol anyone recognizes. Kings don't, typically, walk directly to the guards at the entrance and stand in front of them, in a way that requires the guard to be looked at. The East Guard's eyes didn't move. He was trained, actually. Not to engage with passers-by, with officials, with anyone short of a direct security threat. His gaze remained at that middle distance. But Charles was close now. Close enough, I mean, that what happened next was visible to those of us near the railing, even without being able to hear the words. The king spoke to him. I don't know what he said. I've spent time since trying to find anyone who was close enough to know, and I haven't managed it. The protection officers were positioned in a way that probably made it impossible to lip-read even if you'd had the skill. But you know, I know this. The East Guard heard him. And I know this. Charles put his hand, briefly, on the guard's shoulder. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, 3 at most. The hand on the shoulder. The words spoken quietly. And then the King of England stepped back, straightened, and then walked inside. The crowd made a sound I've never quite heard before. Not cheering, not gasping. Something between the two. Something that didn't have a clean name. And I thought standing there with my useless camera and my whole understanding of what this day was going to be like in ruins, whatever those words were, whatever happened in those 2 seconds, That mattered. Not for the cameras, not for the crowd. Plus, not look for the institutional record that would probably never include this moment. It mattered because, a young man was standing in the cold with his face composed and his dignity intact, and something had happened to him that his training hadn't prepared him for, and the most powerful person in that institution had come out of a car on a gray Tuesday morning and said, in whatever words he chose, "I see you." But by the following morning, 3 videos were circulating. I know honestly because I found 2 of them within 24 hours of getting back to my hotel, and a third surfaced the day after. That on a forum I won't name, which had the steadiest footage because it had been shot on an older phone with better optical stabilization than the average 2024 flagship. The internet, I think, has this specific irony built into it. The person most likely to have captured something clearly is the person least likely to have been trying to. None of the videos were definitive. That's the word that kept appearing in comment sections, in the tentative posts people were making. Definitive. As in, there's no definitive proof. The angles were all wrong or slightly wrong. The crowd was in the way. The key moment happened in a gap between bodies, or in the half-second before someone started filming, or just outside the frame of someone who had been filming but had panned away at the wrong moment. The palace issued well, nothing, which is itself a form of language. Their silence on things that didn't happen is a particular kind of silence. Bored, slightly offended, professionally tired. Their silence on things that complicate the narrative is different, denser, more careful. This was the second kind. I'm not going to claim certainty about what I saw. I want to be clear about that, because I think in the current climate, there's a temptation to reach certainty about things because certainty feels better than the alternative, and I don't want to be part of that. I'm an ordinary, basically, a person who was in a public place on a Tuesday morning and witnessed something that I cannot fully account for, and that has stayed with me in the specific way. That genuinely confusing things stay with you, not as a trauma, not as an obsession, just as an open question that your mind returns to every now and then, like a tongue returning to a sore tooth. What I can tell you is what I saw. What I can tell you is how it felt. And what I can tell you, with rather more confidence, is what happened. To me, for what it's worth, in the days afterward, because that I lived through completely and without ambiguity. The morning after, I'd breakfast in a cafe near Southwark that did proper coffee and a full English that was worth the cardiological consequences. And I sat at a small table by the window and wrote out everything I remembered in the Notes app on my phone. Time-stamped observations, for whatever they were worth. I do this sometimes after significant experiences. It started as a travel habit and has become something else. A way of taking my own account seriously enough to record it. I read through what I wrote several times that morning. Here is what I kept coming back to. The question of what Camilla intended, whether the contact was accidental, whether it was a gesture that read differently from different angles, whether there was a context I couldn't see. That question is genuinely beyond what I could answer. I don't know her. I don't know what her relationship is to the ceremonial staff. I don't know what happened in the moments before the car stopped that might have preceded the moment I witnessed. I was an outsider, looking through gaps in a crowd at something that lasted 4 seconds. But the question of the guard, his reaction, his composure, the specific quality of his stillness in the aftermath, that I watched closely and for a long time, and that I can speak to with more confidence. He didn't break, to be fair, and I don't mean that as a cliché. I mean it with the specific texture I gave it when I first thought it. Standing at that railing on a cold November morning. He didn't break. Whatever that moment cost him internally, and something in me insists it cost something. That humans are not built to receive certain things without internal movement. He didn't give it to the crowd. Did not kind of. He give it to the cameras. Did not give it to the institution that was, in that moment, asking something very particular of him. There's, I guess, a version of this story where that's admirable in a straightforward way. British stoicism, military discipline, the stiff upper lip made manifest in a young man with a bearskin hat. And if that's, well, the version you want, I understand it, I don't dismiss it. But I think I've been thinking about a different version. The retired Corporal Gary at that pub near Waterloo had said something else that I've come back to. Late in our conversation, after the pint was finished and we were both on the second one and the topic had moved around and come back, he said, "The thing people don't understand about that role is that you've to love it. You actually do. The uniform, the tradition, or what it represents. If you're just doing it for the money or the resume, you'll crack by week 3. The lads who last, who genuinely do the job properly, they mean it. They believe in what they're standing in front of." He looked at his pint. And that, well, makes it harder, not easier. Because for what it's worth, you're protecting something you love. And if the thing you love makes a demand of you that you can't, he shook his head, well, you still protect it. Because that's who you are. Not because you don't feel it, because you feel it and you do it anyway. I think about that in relation to the East Guard, and I feel something that I also don't have a clean word for. What Charles did matters in that context, which not as a grand gesture, it wasn't. It was 2 seconds and a hand on a shoulder and words I couldn't hear. But in the grammar of that institution, in the language of what those uniforms mean and what those people have signed on to represent, it was a lot. It was a king saying, "The institution sees what the institution asks of you. The institution sees what it sometimes costs. There are people who will read about this and say it's nothing, a misunderstanding, a tourist with a bad angle and an overactive imagination. There are people, honestly, who will read about this and go to the other extreme, who will make it into something enormous, a symbol of rot, a scandal, a confirmation of everything they already believed about power and its disregard for ordinary people. I don't honestly think it's either. Plus, I think it's something in between, which is usually where the true and interesting things live. I think a woman with enormous privilege, raised in it, shaped by it, accustomed to it in the way that makes certain behaviors feel to the person committing them like less of a gesture than there, made a mistake or made a choice, and a young man bore it the way his training and his character required him to, and an older man who has spent the last several years learning, sometimes painfully publicly, what it means to fall short of what an institution requires. That man came out of a car and did something that cost him nothing, materially, and everything symbolically. He stood up. I know that's sort of a strange way to describe climbing out of a Range Rover. But that's what it was, and he stood up for something. He saw a thing that needed to be seen by someone with the standing to see it, and he saw it. That morning, that gray, silver-white, suspended Tuesday morning, I'd walked to Buckingham Palace, on no particular agenda, just the loose tourist impulse to be somewhere historic before the light changed. I wasn't supposed, I think, to be there, but I'm glad I was, which not because I witnessed something scandalous, not because I've footage to sell or a claim to make, but because I saw a young man hold himself together under something his training never explicitly prepared him for. I saw a king cross a courtyard on a cold morning because someone told him what had happened, and he decided that silence wasn't acceptable. There are days when institutions fail the people inside them. There are days when the people inside institutions are better than the institutions deserve. That Tuesday was both things, in the space of about 40 minutes. I finished my coffee. I took the tube to Waterloo and looked at the river for a while because that's what I do when I need to be near something that keeps moving, regardless of what's happening on its banks. The Thames was the same color as the sky, silver, white, suspended. I thought about the East Guard still at his post by now, or replaced by someone else for the afternoon shift, the rotation happening with the same quiet efficiency as everything else in that world. I thought about what Gary had said. You still protect it, because that's who you are. Not because you don't feel it, because you feel it and you do it anyway. And I thought about how that's not really about guards, is it? That's about most of us, most of the time. The gap between what we feel and what we carry, and the choice about which one we let the world see. The guard made that choice on a November morning in front of 40 tourists and 3 phone cameras. I don't know his name. Plus, I never will, but I don't think I'll forget his face.